Hello and welcome to the Merchandising Minute. I'm your host, Greg Wilson. Today we'll cover the concept of demand and its application to allocation and store replenishment. To start, let's make sure we're defining demand in a consistent way. When I discuss demand, I'm referring to the potential for sales. This is very different than, say, historical sales. Where historical sales are what you did sell, demand is what you could have sold. The delta between the two is generally referred to as lost sales. How do we get a better understanding of demand? Well, let's look at an example and walk through the numbers. Here's a chart representing sales for a typical moderate to low volume item. Units are on the left axis, and time periods, let's call them weeks in this case, are across the bottom. So we have 14 units of sales over a 12-week period. If we were to make our next allocation or replenishment decision based on historical sales for this period, whether that's for this item or for a new item we're using this as its like history for, we'd see a potential for sales of 14 units. And we'd make our inventory decisions accordingly. Notice, though, that there are 3 points where the sales are zero. These periods could represent missed opportunity. To truly understand if that's the case or not, we need more information. Here, we've layered on the beginning inventory position for each period. We started with plenty of inventory, but as we sold through, we eventually sold out before the next receipt arrived. In any spot where the two lines touch, we were out of stock. Here in week 8, we sold 1 unit, but it was our last inventory unit. In week 9, we had no inventory left to sell, until we got a receipt in week 10. If we were out of stock, we may have missed selling opportunity. Now, there are a number of different ways to determine and calculate what missed opportunity is. We'll touch on that in a minute before we're done. But in this case, we've determined that we could have sold 1 additional unit in week 8 and 2 in week 9. If that's the case, the true potential was not 14 as historical sales represented, but rather it was 17. It might not seem like much, but that's over a 17% increase. Could your business use a 17% increase? I know when I was on the retail side of the fence, mine surely could. Now, this is one store, and you can't possibly determine and accurately correct for every single one of these situations. But if you put effort into it and make a consistent minor improvement, it's very feasible to create a 1 to 2% increase in both sales and profitability. Again, that might not seem like much on the surface, but if you do the math with your company's sales and profit values, you'll quickly find that this can represent hundreds of thousands or potentially millions of dollars in additional profit. So how can you capture that opportunity? First, let's look at what you can do right now. Obviously, one thing you can do to get an appropriate perspective on historical demand is to create a process that evaluates sales and inventory as we described and calculate lost sales. The reality is doing this on a full, large-scale basis is a pretty big process. Using traditional technology, it usually ends up taking significant time, computing resources, and data storage space. We'll assume that's not an option for the immediate future. If you have access to reporting or extract tools, it may be worthwhile to calculate lost sales in a spreadsheet or a similar tool for high priority products or situations though. If you're constrained to working within the confines of a traditional allocation or replenishment system only, your best bet is probably to spend a bit more time setting criteria. When you determine what time frame of data to reference in an allocation or while creating seasonality profiles or other similar activity, do some extra analysis on the data you're considering using. Try to locate ranges of time where there were minimal stockouts across the stores you're including. In our earlier example, that may mean focusing only on the first 7 weeks of data. This works particularly well when you're using calculation methods that utilize things like percent contribution, mix percent, index, ratio to average, or other similar comparative calculation methodologies. The result is stores that had stockouts are no longer being compared relatively to stores that didn't. Therefore, the relationship between them is more reflective of how the stores actually behave. The downside of that is now you're missing the uniqueness of the stores outside of that period. Ultimately, in my personal experience, is that the quality of distributions when limiting that reference data to non-stockout periods, it's consistently higher than including the extended range that includes stockouts. The result is worth the effort.
This episode of the Merchandising Minute is sponsored by Quantum Retail. Quantum Retail provides inventory optimization solutions covering areas traditionally supported by assortment and range planning, order planning and warehouse replenishment, or allocation and store replenishment systems. Quantum's solution, Q, can optimize existing systems or replace them entirely. Offered as either a hosted solution or deployable behind your own firewall, Q can produce significant returns by improving selected pieces of your process or updating it entirely to the most advanced mechanism available for managing your inventory. Quantum Retail, a better way.
Should you be entertaining the thought of investing in new solutions in the allocation or replenishment space, here are a few things you should consider. First, if you're presented with a solution that doesn't derive historical demand and use that as a base for all of its recommendations, my suggestion is to smile, shake their hand, politely thank them, and send them on their way and out the door. If the foundation of the data that you're making these critical decisions on is obviously inherently flawed, and it doesn't matter how sophisticated the rest of it is, you're gonna get flawed results. Period. Second, take time to investigate the logic behind how lost sales are being derived. The only thing worse than not considering historical demand at all is calculating it poorly and getting an equally wrong or potentially worse answer. If you're investing in technology that has to take you well into the future, don't settle. Some solutions make do with using the average of the last few period sales to determine potential. Not terribly sophisticated. It works if sales are unusually consistent, but for most products, that's just not the case. Others take a working forecast for the store and assume that that's the correct number. We'll talk about forecasts at length in future episodes, but regardless of how much effort and technology you throw at them, all forecasts have one thing in common. They're always wrong. It's just not good enough. Ideally, you should look for solutions that consider how stores, products, and various groups of each are trending all around the periods of stockouts. This can supplement, validate, and improve the simpler methods of calculating lost sales and demand. If a store is trending up in a particular product as it goes into the stockout, it probably could have sold more than it did in the last couple of weeks. If it's trending down, then it should be less. It's worth the time to understand how this is being done. I hope you found today's information about demand useful. We'll be talking more about demand as we start to apply it to solving other problems in merchandising. In the meantime, let us know what your priorities are. What would you like us to discuss? Send a note to questions@merchandisingminute.com or hit our website. It's just a simple blog, but you can sign up for an RSS notification when new episodes are posted or sign up for our email list and get notifications that way. It's merchandisingminute.com. Now this whole project is still a bit of a work in progress, so bear with us and we'll iron the kinks out. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Now let's listen to some Jobo.